So let's see if people are getting back. It was a short break. And I will hand over back to Harry to moderate this, the beginning of this session.
Great. Well, we're going to have a discussion between two people that have been involved in various kinds of practical efforts on the ground. So I think we're going to start off with Avijit Chatterjee. Avijit, are you here?
Yes, I'm there.
Excellent. Well, I think you had some things to say, so I'll turn over the floor to you.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Avijit, and I've been working on the Tenure Facility project in India for the past 3 years. I think the segment we are talking in is now what we need to know, and I take these to be the key research areas ahead. And I think it should be centered around what I will say transitioning to a more sustainable system. My immediate observations are, number one, the immediate crisis which was faced by forest-dependent communities across India was because the local markets just vanished because of the sudden lockdowns. People who were not able to sell the minor forest produce, which is the non-timber forest produce, and buy essential food items. That was the first crisis which hit people. The question of institutions becomes very important to me here, because as we noticed, even during the peak lockdown, community forest rights titled communities across many parts of the state of Maharashtra were able to organize collection and auction of tendu leaves. This is a leaf which is used to roll Indian cigarettes. It's a huge livelihood source for close to more than 1 million people in central India during just the time that lockdown started. And it was evident that with the strength of the village councils as community institutions with secure community titles recognized, which was paramount in tackling the crisis. And we need to come back to this as a path to recovery. Institutional questions are very key. While the concern about additional extractive pressures on forests in the wake of recovery models is absolutely valid, both from an academic as well as a practical perspective. However, as most of you, all of you, in fact, have said, that it should be studied and researched in depth to actually find out, like for India, we would like to really find out which states, especially the forested states, and which districts we really want to, drill it down and find out which are the areas which can provide a decent livelihood to people. In the wake of the pandemic and ways to resolve it in the short term and long term, we were fortunate enough to have very good discussions and engagements with two key forested states in India, which are also part of the project we are covering, states of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, where the people who lead governments are seriously interested in finding ways to rebuild a forest-based rural economy. I think the real opportunities lie here, which have arisen possibly because of the challenge of the pandemic, but we need to seize this opportunity, absolutely. And I think the time has really come where we need to again, put this discourse firmly back on the agenda and lead to effective policy interventions and concrete government steps and actions. And it's a pressing need now. I really welcome this dialogue between academics and practitioners. It must be deepened, it must be widened, and we need to find out ways to collaborate, because this is a severe lack. I am a practitioner, I'm not an academic, and I feel this lack. We need, kind of evidence build up support to really argue our case more strongly. And we have a fantastic opportunity, and we need to seize it. Thank you.
Excellent, Avijit. Those are really important questions, and I think that really gets to the heart of why we're here, actually. And it really highlights the need to sort of bridge the gap between actual empirical realities on the ground and trying to understand this sort of very differentiated impacts, and then also find ways to make concrete policy suggestions for that. And on that note, I turn it over to Raymond, who's also had some experience on these issues at the tenure facility.
Harry, I just wanted to compliment Avijit, what he said, and to bring another interesting case we are seeing on the ground, which is not actual. It's also contribute to research and action and policy, but using tools created by indigenous people, like what we are seeing in our project in Peru. The indigenous community there in Loreto and Madrid de la Dios just created an interactive database, an online portal for mapping the spread of the virus and providing vital data to better understand the impact of this pandemic on indigenous population. So there's another neat year of technology. We can use the technology to bridge knowledge and policy to come out with concrete solution. Because this database is the first of its kind, and it compiles information crucial for planning and respond in this data. And it also helps government with a lot of information to make better decisions, how they can manage this, this pandemic and even the post-pandemic scenario. So it is really important. What do we have at hand? How do we use indigenous people knowledge? How do we bring their knowledge in a more systematized and a formalized way and linking it with research, adding technology into it to produce a better solution to manage this crisis and even post the crisis? So this is really something we are seeing from the tenure facility project that makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of uses that we can learn from it and try to scale it in other different communities.
Thank you so much for sharing. Harry, do you want to? You can round up, and then I will. Yeah, okay. I think that's actually a good bridge into why we are here, because we have this knowledge among different actors at different level. And we are trying to, with this dialogue and this initiative ahead, seeing how can we bridge this sort of knowledge between different groups and levels. And that is what we will also do now, to continue to discuss in groups of about 10 in each group for 25 minutes. So we will discuss the knowledge gaps in this area and how we can bridge these gaps, and perhaps even more concrete suggestions on collaborations ahead that we can also contribute with from our side. We are all now getting back to the main room from these discussions, and I hope that you've all had some exchange with partners that you usually don't bump into from different sectors and regions. And we are interested to hear a little bit on your thoughts and some points from the discussions. So we will do as we did before, to open a Mentimeter. And it can be both from the discussions, but also your thoughts on the questions that were posed on sort of knowledge gaps, or suggestions on how we can work together to fill these gaps, or if it's more even concrete suggestions on how we could collaborate ahead. It could also be what you as participants see that actors as Focali SIANI and our platform, what we could support, facilitation with dialogues, collaborations, what is important, what should we try to, I mean, we have limited capacity, but what should we try to focus on ahead? You can suggest that for us. So you can both pick up key messages from the groups and the suggestions ahead for collaboration. And maybe someone want to also share from the group, so you can share verbally as well. You can raise your hand, and I can you can share something if there was something from the groups that you want to share to the rest, or ideas on collaboration ahead. Anyone that want to? Camilo, I know that you shared a lot of ideas in the room. Do you want to mention some to all? You shared interest in collaboration as well, and what do you see from your perspective?
Yes. What I said was that we need to strengthen the mechanisms to articulate these spaces. That is to say, how can we increase the visibility of the problems we're facing in our territories? We know this Amazon corridor, and we know we need to support one another here. We're facing a huge issue that I see as a generalized issue. I see it in Asia, here in Colombia, Ecuador. All of us who are part of this corridor, we're suffering the same issues. Governments that commit to international environmental goals, such as the Conference of the Parties or the Paris Agreement, but these policies are not reaching the territories. In Colombia, the issue of deforestation is growing. And on the other hand, the government are playing a key role in violating rights. So we need to strengthen the research alongside the indigenous peoples to increase the visibility of these issues. And we were saying that in our case, we're carrying out research at local level. And sometimes, because these research is carried out in Spanish, the materials, the content is not reaching other actors. So we need to strengthen some collaboration mechanisms in order to find a way to translate this data and findings. And also the organizations themselves can help us to increase the visibility and to exert pressure on different organizations and the Human Rights High Commission and other organizations. Those are the main themes I was mentioning before during the group discussion. Over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I think this is something that our partner SIANI, they have a very broad communication outreach, and I think this is something they could also, in collaboration with us, support to highlight these cases and voices and translate reports that are coming from local actors in different regions. So thank you for highlighting this need. Is there anyone else that also writing answers now that would like to share? One final, I think we have time for before we go over to Anne. Let me see, Alark, I invite you to share.
Thank you. And I know there's a ton of information coming in. One thing that jumped out in our conversation in our group was how do we empower? First is can forest shifts and extractions be documented through current evidence technologies like remote sensing? For example, in COVID-based extraction, if it was subsistence-based extraction, did it really change forest structure? And can remote sensing really capture that forest structure? So in this case, then what kind of technologies can be used by rural communities to not only capture that sense, but also empower them to be able to communicate that with a wider audience? I think was really, really useful. And I think one thing that our colleague here from Zimbabwe was suggesting was photo documentation or video documentation by communities, which again, I think it should be seen. What's the best way to find that? And just from one more point was the idea of strength and strength of institutions. I think it was clear that certain places with very strong governance, local community institutions, were able to create very strong, lockdowns as a proxy to their ability to engage. And I think it's the question is, what mechanisms allow for that strength, and how those institutions actually can be used in long-term kind of survivability and coping against not just COVID, but many other shocks that we may anticipate based on climate and market conditions.
Yes.
I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. You can continue to write. You can write in both Spanish and English, because we will get help to translate this later. And I also want to share some, as we said, this is the first dialogue on this theme. We will follow up. We will listen to also what has come in now, suggestions. We have Mentimeter. You can also email us if you have concrete ideas on how we could collaborate between different actors ahead. What we will try to do is to at least arrange as kind of a follow-up meeting for those who have attended here today, and also try to extract some sort of key messages from this dialogue here and what has been shared, and share this. And we can also try to link and share to the resources that you have shared with us in the chat. And I would also like to encourage you I think my colleague will place the link to a survey in the chat that we opened ahead of this meeting. It has not been shared so broadly, and it's in English, but it was a way for us to, in the work on this theme ahead, here you can suggest both references, if there are links to reports or news that on this theme. There's also an open space that you can place like a text. You can also email us if that is easier, but to share narratives on this theme. There is also a place where you can suggest speakers for continued, dialogues ahead, people that you think have something important to share on this topic, or there could be people that should be interviewed, and we will see. Of course, we have limited capacity, but it's a good way for us to get sort of bottom-up suggestions on what are the important issues to highlight, what are the reports coming from different actors, and we will see how we can do to if there's an interest to work on this and synthesize some sort of key areas here. So that's some of our initial thoughts on possible collaborations ahead, but please feel free to express your ideas after this dialogue and based on what you are doing to us, and we can see how we can be kind of a matching platform and how we could work together ahead. And I think with that said, I think the Mentimeter will be open but not shown on the screen now, so that you can still type in. But now instead we will go to the closing reflection. And thank you, Anne Larsson, for having such a patience. And I hope you are still with us. And if you want someone to stay for a 2.5 hour long event, then you ask this person to present the last. Isn't that right? But we have so last but not least, we have the honor to see what reflections and sort of recommendations, critical points that you have gathered from listening to this dialogue and the perspectives shared. I think most of you know Anne. She's a principal scientist and team leader for equity, gender justice and tenure at C4ECRAF. So welcome, Anne. The floor is yours for your 5-minute reflection.
Thank you. So first, I just want to thank you for inviting me here. There's been so much rich discussion. It's obviously impossible to capture it all in 5 minutes. So I apologize in advance for not doing it due justice. But just to give a quick overview of trying to pull these things together, what we heard today, obviously COVID revealed incredible vulnerabilities and also resilience. And the topics we heard about were kind of divided into 2 halves, right? We have the human the social, the justice side of this, especially for forest peoples, indigenous peoples, and local communities. On the other hand, we have the biophysical, the ecological, agroecological, the forests themselves, and how that actually played out on the ground in terms of resilience, vulnerability, the impact went through all of these other variables that we also heard about. So one is sort of the basic safety conditions. That includes health, but also human rights conditions, which we've heard so much about. Tenure security, obviously a major issue here. Jobs, something we heard about, especially from India. The forest and ecological condition itself, we heard about the availability of wild foods and the potential of the forest to be able to provide livelihoods. And the other two, which I think are really key, are the role of the state and the role of community self-organization and governance. And again, all of those kind of filtered through to determine what we've heard today, sort of what the actual outcome was. And the role of the state is incredibly important, of course. I mean, we heard it in the very first two presentations, these kind of contradictory views, right? Or not necessarily contradictory, they're contradictory in and of themselves. We need the state. We need the state to protect indigenous peoples, to regulate, to carry out the law, to provide services. And at the same time, the state can be the one driving the problem, or driving it, or at least facilitating or making it possible. So that's a really big issue. And I think the fundamental question there is, who is the state accountable to? We often talk about participation. We don't talk enough about accountability. So it's my pet issue of the week is accountability. And then the other, of course, is the self-organization and governance capacities of communities, as well as, and maybe this is getting into some of the other things we heard, is how do you actually have an impact? It's not, the communities aren't going to be able to do that by themselves, but also their second level organizations and their alliances and people, hopefully like us, who can support and build broader strategies and build the power of those alliances. So all of this comes to the topic of recovery, which is, you know, what kind of recovery are we talking about, for whom and of what? And of course, there's a lot of urgency around this. And if I can quote myself from a talk I did last week, urgency has always overridden the slow and messy processes of participation and democracy and of assuring the rights and livelihoods of indigenous peoples and local communities. So this issue of urgency of recovery is really dominated outside of our circles by these growth models that continue to be destructive and are also the historically driving the vulnerability and the inequality. So I just want to put up one slide as sort of the closing visual. Can I do that? Okay. And I don't know how many of you are aware. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so are you seeing the donut here? I probably
Yes.
expand it. Sorry, I'm trying to do too many things at the same time.
It's okay. We see it.
So this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with donut economics. It's a model that was proposed by Kate Rayworth. It's incredibly powerful. And it's the whole idea of it is that well, I don't know that specifically when this started, Kate would have said she was anti-growth, but clearly we have a problem with the model of GDP growth as our goal for anything. And in her model, it's very simple. The outer edge is the biophysical limits of the planet, and the inner edge is sort of the social foundation that we want to be building for everyone to live. And the center space, the donut itself, is the safe and just space for humanity. So I just like to put this out there. It's one of my favorite models of what I think we need to be struggling for. We have to find an alternative goal for what we're fighting for. And we are not in the majority on this at all. I mean, the all but one country in the world still uses GDP as their measure for progress and for moving forward and living well on this planet. And obviously, I think everyone here agrees that that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at this safe and just space for all of us. And that's built on a rights-based approach, as Kundan said, and the foundation of the indigenous people and others who are living in the forest communities around the world. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much for sharing, and we knew that you could give us some good food for thought here at the end. And it's always good to be able to reuse good thoughts as well. And I think this is something many of us struggle with, that there's so many issues that are so urgent, but then if you run too fast, you're leaving some people behind. So it's important for us to think of. A final question to you. For us now, we have, of course, Focali and SIANI have been working with multi-stakeholder dialogues for a long time, but now we are entering more deeper into the forest issues as well, and trying to focus a bit on new issues and bring in new partners, actors. If you have any recommendations for us to how to handle this, including more bottom-up voices. This is what this platform want to do, not just invite the regular sort of suspects and voices.
So yes, I mean, the research we've been doing in the last few years is on multi-stakeholder dialogues, specifically multi-stakeholder platforms. And we have a lot of tools to help facilitate platforms along in terms of communication and addressing inequality. I think the biggest problem, there's this sort of idea that we're all in this together, right? Which COVID showed we're not. We're on the planet together, but we have very different vulnerabilities, I guess, to come back to that term. And the same thing is true of sort of the solutions. We have to solve this together, right? But in fact, we also have different ideas of what that solution means, the solution of what and for whom. And everyone is calling for multi-stakeholder dialogues now. So it's exciting. We do need to talk to each other, but at the same time, our research shows that we did specifically, I'm just writing a paper right now about the research on the Indigenous people and local communities and their perspective on the forums that they're involved in. And of course, some of them are great, but there's always a certain amount of frustration and sense of inequality and that not enough is being done. And one of the things that we're arguing from our findings is that Indigenous peoples and local communities in such dialogues need to have their own space for collective action within the dialogue. So the dialogue, we all think of that is our collective action, right? We're all coming together to work together. But in fact, the people who are more vulnerable, the people who have the biggest at risk, which includes Indigenous peoples, women, Indigenous women, for example, women within these communities, need their own spaces to organize to come to those spaces. And often what we find is that the Indigenous representative is one person on a panel, on a group of dialogue of 15, or two in a group of 30, or sometimes they're not included at all, which is even worse. But in fact, the ones that we've seen, the two of our group of 11 that were most successful around these issues of equity and around the opinions of the Indigenous peoples and the women in those groups were the ones where they actually were they had a big group, and they were either a large portion of the forum, or they had their own spaces and a lot of work done to facilitate their own spaces to come together and be able to hold the rest of the forum accountable, right?
Yes, thank you so much, Anne, for this reflection as well. I think we are past time, so I need to conclude and also thank all the speakers and organizers and the interpretation team for everything has run smoothly. I think no big hang-ups here. And please do connect with each other and with us for follow-up ideas. And we will come back to you. We have your emails, and we will come back to you with also outputs from this dialogue, outputs from the discussions and Mentimeter. And when we have discussed internally, we will also discuss how to follow up with dialogues and collaborations ahead. But please do reach out to us. Is there anyone else, Harry, or anyone else, Jessica, anyone else in the team that want to say something here?
Yes, I'll make a quick comment. I mean, thank you all for coming. It was really great to hear all of the perspectives. And in the spirit of self-organization, we very much welcome people that have ideas and want to come together to realize them, to contact us. So just to say that.
Yes, I have to say thank you very much all for sharing and being active and being encouraging to get alive these discussions that need so much attention. So very happy to be part of it. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye,
Nice.
everyone.